Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
It all started so simply, or so I thought. For years, my little slice of heaven, the quiet, peaceful existence out here, truly felt like a dream, a perfect escape. We're in a neighborhood that's sort of a mix. Some houses are part of the HOA, some aren't. I was in the latter group, happily minding my own business on my own piece of land. It was mostly quiet, just the usual small-town stuff. Nothing too dramatic ever really happened. My property, a good acre, felt like a world away from any busy city, and that's just how I liked it. I spent my weekends tending to a small garden, tinkering with old furniture, and just enjoying the peace. Building that workshop was supposed to be the capstone, the final touch on my personal paradise. I'd always dreamed of a dedicated space for my woodworking projects, a place where I could really spread out and make some sawdust without turning my garage into a constant mess. I spent months poring over designs, getting all the permits lined up. The county office was a bit of a maze, but I navigated it, got all the stamps and signatures, made sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. The workshop was a modest 250 square feet, nothing huge, but perfect for my needs. It was built with my own two hands with help from a couple of friends on the heavier lifting right there on my deeded lot, about 15 feet from my side property line. I even put in a little porch swing outside, imagining warm summer evenings. I was so proud of it, a place where creativity could truly flourish. My friends Laurel and Mark came over for a small celebratory barbecue when it was done. "Lisa, this is incredible," Laurel exclaimed, admiring the freshly painted exterior. "You really outdid yourself." Mark just nodded, a grin on his face. "Looks like you'll be spending every waking moment in here now." I laughed, feeling a swell of contentment. This was my space, my creation, entirely mine. 3 months later, that feeling of contentment was violently ripped away. It began with a letter, a plain white envelope tucked into my mailbox, nestled between grocery flyers and junk mail. It wasn't from the county or the power company, but from the... I remembered vaguely hearing about them, but since I wasn't a member, I usually just tossed their mail. This time, something about the official-looking seal caught my eye. The letter was short, almost chillingly so. It stated in very formal language that a new amendment had been quietly passed during an emergency board meeting, a meeting I hadn't even known about, let alone been invited to. The amendment declared that any structure over 200 square feet, built within 30 feet of a property line, was now considered shared utility space. I read it again, my brow furrowing. Shared utility space, what did that even mean? Then came the next paragraph, a punch to the gut. "Your workshop," it read, "located at my address, has been identified as falling within the parameters of this new amendment. Effective immediately, this structure now belongs to the community." My blood ran cold. Belonged to the community, my workshop. The one I built, permitted, and paid for on my own land. The letter ended with a threat. Daily fines would commence if I didn't unlock the doors for general member use. I stared at the letter, utterly dumbfounded. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank. I paced my living room, the paper clutched in my hand, my mind racing. How could they do this? I wasn't even part of their HOA. I called Laurel, my voice trembling. "You will not believe this," I started, then read her the letter. There was a pause on the other end. "Lisa," she said slowly, "that's insane. They can't do that. That's your property." I knew she was right, but the official tone of the letter, the threat of fines, it all felt so heavy. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. This was just the beginning. I could feel it. Continue, Sectuion 2. I spent the next few days in a daze trying to make sense of the outrageous claim. I called everyone I knew who had even a passing familiarity with property law. My cousin Mark, who dabbled in real estate, just shook his head. "Lisa, this is highly unusual. HOAs have power, but this sounds like they're way out of line." I even consulted a lawyer, a kind-faced woman named Ms. Davies, who specialized in property disputes. She looked over the letter, her expression growing sterner with each line. "This is an aggressive move, Ms. Davies," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They're attempting to exert authority over land they have no legal claim to, especially given you're not a member." She advised me to ignore their threats for the time being and gather more information on this supposed emergency meeting and the bylaw amendment. "Do not engage with them directly yet," she stressed. "Let's see what else they try." I took Ms. Davies' advice to heart, though it was hard to just sit back and do nothing. The very idea of someone claiming my workshop, a place I poured my sweat and savings into, filled me with a simmering anger. But I also felt a deep sense of unease. What if this wasn't just an idle threat? What if they actually tried to something? The thought gnawed at me. I started keeping a closer eye on my property, checking the locks on the workshop multiple times a day. I even installed a cheap security camera pointed right at the front door, just for my own peace of mind. Every car that slowed down on the street, every unfamiliar face made my heart pound a little faster. Then, one Tuesday morning it happened. I was out in the garden pruning my rose bushes when I heard a distinct clanging sound coming from the direction of my workshop. My blood ran cold. I dropped my shears and rushed around the side of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. Standing there, bold as brass, were three people I vaguely recognized as being part of the HOA board. There was a tall, thin man I knew only as Owen, the supposed HOA president, a stern-faced woman named Karen, who everyone knew was a stickler for rules, and another man, a hulking figure named Graham. Owen was holding a heavy-duty padlock, and Graham was in the process of snapping it onto the latch of my workshop door. My workshop door, the one I had meticulously painted just a few weeks ago. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice cracking with disbelief and fury. They all turned, their expressions varying from smug satisfaction, Karen, to feigned neutrality, Owen, to a slight flicker of unease, Graham. "Ms. Davies," Owen began, his voice surprisingly calm, almost condescending, "we are merely ensuring communal access to the shared utility space, as per the recently amended bylaws." He gestured vaguely at the padlock, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Shared utility space," I spat, my hands clenching into fists. "This is my private property. I am not an HOA member. You have no right to be on my land, let alone padlock my workshop." Karen stepped forward, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, but we do, Ms. Davies. The bylaws were passed, legally and correctly. Your workshop now serves the community." She said community, as if it were a sacred word, something I was somehow defiling by daring to claim ownership of my own shed. "You think you can just march onto my property and steal my workshop?" I did, my voice rising. "This is unbelievable," Owen sighed, as if I were being an unreasonable child. "It's not stealing, Ms. Davies. It's compliance. We sent you a notice. You chose to ignore it. Now we're simply enforcing the rules." Graham, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I caught his eye for a second, and I thought I saw a hint of something like regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Enforcing the rules?" I almost laughed. It was so ridiculous. "You made up a rule to steal my property. I'm calling the police." Owen just shrugged. "Feel free. We have all the documentation to support our actions. We're well within our rights," Karen added, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Perhaps you should have attended the community meetings, Ms. Davies. Then you would have been aware of these important changes." I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. "There are people on my property trespassing and they've padlocked my workshop," I explained to the dispatcher, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. The HOA trio watched me, completely unfazed. When the police arrived, two young officers, they listened patiently as Owen presented his carefully prepared documents, copies of the supposed bylaw amendment, a printout of the notice they'd sent me, and even a resolution from their board meeting. I showed them my deed, my building permits, everything proving the workshop was mine. On my land. The officers, clearly out of their depth with this bizarre property dispute, looked from me to Owen, then to the padlock, then back to the documents. They suggested it was a civil matter, and that I should pursue it in court. They wouldn't remove the padlock, citing the HOA's documentation. They left, leaving me standing there, my jaw aching from clenching it so hard, staring at my now imprisoned workshop. It felt like a violation. A deep personal invasion. My private space, my haven, was no longer mine. It was a trophy in their twisted game. Continue. The days that followed were a blur of frustration and simmering anger. The padlock on my workshop felt like a constant insult, a glaring symbol of their invasion. I tried reasoning with Owen again, calling him, but he simply reiterated their stance, his voice annoyingly calm. "Ms. Davies, we're simply doing our duty to the community. Your noncompliance is causing unnecessary friction." Friction? They were holding my property hostage. Karen, it turned out, was the real orchestrator of this whole mess. I learned from a few gossiping neighbors, who were themselves either too afraid or too indifferent to speak up against the HOA, that Karen had been pushing for stricter regulations for years. She apparently saw my workshop as an eyesore and a precedent for unchecked construction. It seemed this wasn't just about the bylaws, it was personal for her. She saw herself as the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, was preparing a cease and desist letter, but she warned me that legal battles could drag on. "They're banking on you giving up, Lisa," she explained. They want to make it as difficult and expensive as possible. That thought infuriated me even more. They thought they could just bully me into submission. They had another thing coming. I started documenting everything. Photos of the padlock, timestamps of calls, copies of their letters, even notes from my conversations with neighbors. I even found out through a little digging online that the emergency meeting where they passed the bylaw amendment was held with barely any notice, and several board members weren't even present. It all smelled fishy, like they were cutting corners to push this through without proper oversight. Then the lawsuits started. The first one arrived via certified mail, a thick envelope from the HOA's lawyers. Complaint for malicious noncompliance, the title read. Malicious noncompliance. I almost choked on my coffee. They claimed I was intentionally obstructing their communal access to my workshop, and that my refusal to unlock it was causing significant financial strain on the HOA, forcing them to spend money on legal fees. They were suing me for legal fees. It was so twisted, so utterly backward, it was almost laughable. Almost. Ms. Davies just shook her head. They're trying to intimidate you, Lisa. This is a tactic to drain your resources. As if that wasn't enough, a few weeks later, another lawsuit landed on my doorstep. This one was even more outrageous. It was a claim for emotional distress caused by the workshop's exclusivity. I read the words, then read them again, convinced I was misinterpreting them. Emotional distress caused by workshop being? They claimed that the very fact my workshop was locked and unavailable for community use was causing mental anguish and distress to the HOA members, specifically mentioning Karen's supposed severe anxiety and Owen's sleepless nights. The level of absurdity was beyond anything I could have imagined. I could just picture Karen sitting in her living room, dramatically clutching her chest and fanning herself, claiming that the sight of my locked workshop was causing her untold suffering. It was a transparent attempt to paint me as the villain, to make it seem like was the unreasonable one. This wasn't just about my workshop anymore. This was about their power, their control, and their twisted sense of entitlement. It was a pure power play, a demonstration of how far they were willing to go to enforce their bizarre agenda. My neighbors, bless their hearts, were mostly quiet observers. A few whispered their support, offering vague apologies that they couldn't do more. Karen has a lot of sway, one woman, an elderly lady named Eleanor, told me in hushed tones over my fence one afternoon. She's got a way of making people feel guilty if they don't go along with her. I saw the fear in Eleanor's eyes, and it struck me that the HOA wasn't just terrorizing me. They were holding the entire neighborhood hostage with their petty rules and threats. One afternoon, as I was mowing my lawn, Owen and Karen drove by slowly in Owen's golf cart, usually reserved for inspecting people's flower beds. They slowed down right in front of my workshop, and Karen pointed directly at the padlock, then looked at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. Owen just nodded, a knowing look exchanged between them. It was a deliberate act of provocation, a taunt. I gripped the lawnmower handle tighter, fighting the urge to throw something at them. My anger was a hot burning coal in my chest. They wanted to break me, to make me surrender. But every ridiculous lawsuit, every smug look, just solidified my resolve. I wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. This wasn't just about a workshop, it was about principle, about standing up to bullies who thought they could dictate every aspect of someone's life. The fight had just begun, and I was ready for it. I just had to figure out their weakness, continue. The lawsuits, as ridiculous as they were, solidified my resolve. I decided to go on the offensive. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, had been steadily gathering information, and what she uncovered made my blood boil. It turned out the emergency board meeting was anything but legitimate. Owen, Karen, and Graham, along with 2 other cronies, had essentially held a secret meeting, excluding several other board members who they knew wouldn't agree with their outrageous plans. They hadn't provided proper notice, hadn't followed their own HOA's internal procedures for amending bylaws, and had even forged some signatures on the meeting minutes to make it look official. This wasn't just petty overreach, it was outright fraud. This changes everything, Lisa, Ms. Davies said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. We're no longer just defending against their frivolous lawsuits. We're going after them for malfeasance, fraud, and illegal interference with your property rights. The new strategy invigorated me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a fighter, armed with the truth. We filed a countersuit detailing their fraudulent activities, the illegal bylaw amendment, and the wrongful seizure of my workshop. We sought not only the return of my property, but also significant damages for the emotional distress they had inflicted, the legal fees I had incurred, and the loss of use of my workshop. The HOA's lawyers, a high-priced firm from the city, seemed momentarily stunned by our countersuit. They had clearly expected me to roll over, to be intimidated by their tactics. Instead, I had doubled down. The initial court hearing was a tense affair. Owen, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, looked uncomfortable under the judge's stern gaze. Karen, however, seemed to relish the spotlight, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation as she dramatically recounted her suffering due to my exclusive workshop. I just watched her, a cold fury settling deep in my gut. Graham, looking more nervous than ever, kept his eyes glued to the floor. Ms. Davies presented our evidence methodically, detailing the irregularities of their emergency meeting, the forged signatures, and the deliberate exclusion of other board members. She brought in affidavits from 2 disgruntled former HOA members who had witnessed Karen's increasingly dictatorial behavior. She even presented a recorded phone call, which I had secretly taped on Ms. Davies' advice, where Owen admitted to bending the rules a little to get the bylaw passed quickly. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, listened intently, her expression unreadable. Then it was my turn to speak. I described the peaceful life I had before their interference, the pride I felt building my workshop, and the shock and disbelief when they claimed it. I described the feeling of violation when they padlocked my door, the anger when they sued me for emotional distress. I looked directly at Owen and Karen. They didn't just try to take my workshop, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. They tried to take my peace of mind, my sense of security, my right to my own property. They are bullies, and they need to be stopped. The judge reserved her judgment, but the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. Owen and Karen looked deflated, their earlier smugness replaced by a dawning realization that their carefully constructed charade was crumbling. Graham looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The very next day, a local news reporter, tipped off by someone Ms. Davies knew, ran a story about the bizarre HOA land grab, exposing the fraudulent actions of the Lakeside Meadows HOA board. The story went viral, picked up by national news outlets hungry for quirky local disputes. Suddenly, Owen, Karen, and Graham were not just local busybodies, they were public figures of ridicule. The public outcry was immediate and fierce. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up before suddenly found their voices. Calls and emails flooded the HOA office demanding answers. Other homeowners, previously unaware of the fraudulent bylaw amendment, were outraged that their own property rights could be so easily threatened by a rogue board. Petitions circulated, demanding the resignation of Owen, Karen, and Graham. The pressure was immense. The final court ruling came down 2 weeks later, and it was a complete demolition of the HOA's claims. Judge Miller didn't mince words. She declared the bylaw amendment null and void, citing egregious procedural irregularities and fraudulent misrepresentation. She ordered the immediate removal of the padlock from my workshop and permanently enjoined the HOA from ever interfering with my property again. But she didn't stop there. She ruled that Owen, Karen, and Graham, as individuals, were personally liable for damages to me, including all my legal fees, compensation for the loss of use of my workshop, and a substantial amount for emotional distress. The judge stated in her written ruling that their actions constituted a deliberate and malicious attempt to seize private property under false pretenses, and that their emotional distress claims were patently absurd and an abuse of the legal system. The judge's ruling was an absolute hammer blow to the Owen, visibly deflated and pale, tendered his resignation as president the very next day, mumbling something about personal reasons. Graham, the quieter enabler, quickly followed suit, practically vanishing from the neighborhood without a trace. Karen, however, was a different story. She dug in her heels, defiant to the bitter end, issuing increasingly desperate statements to her rapidly dwindling band of supporters, still stubbornly clinging to the delusion that she was the victim of some grand witch hunt. Yet her reign of terror was decisively over. Stripped of Owen's weak leadership and Graham's grudging cooperation, her once formidable power base crumbled into dust. An emergency meeting was swiftly convened by the ones Owen and Karen had deliberately excluded and sidelined. They wasted no time, voting unanimously to strip Karen of every last shred of authority. Then, with a clear mandate, they initiated the formal process of dissolving the existing, corrupt, and electing an entirely new, truly transparent leadership. As a significant gesture, they also issued a formal public apology directly to me. pledging to cover any outstanding damages not already addressed by the personal judgment against Owen, Karen, and Graham. Stepping into my workshop, finally freed from that humiliating padlock, felt like walking into a monument. It wasn't just a shed, it was a testament to perseverance, a symbol of. The familiar scent of sawdust and fresh wood filled the air, a comforting embrace. This space was undeniably mine again, a true haven. The legal battle had been brutal, draining me both financially and emotionally, but I had faced down the bullies and won. As it had operated under the tyrannical grip of Owen and Karen was utterly dismantled, its fraudulent architects exposed and brought low, while the scars of such a brutal contest would undoubtedly remain, and the neighborhood would need time to heal and rebuild trust, had, against all odds, undeniably prevailed. OMG, this whole HOA thing is just a prime example of why those groups are absolute garbage. Like, who even are these people, thinking they can just waltz onto someone's private land and claim their shared utility space? Are you kidding me with that corporate speak bull? It's just a thinly veiled excuse for busybodies like Karen to exert power over everyone else's lives. The sheer entitlement to decide what someone else does with their property, especially when that person isn't even a part of their little club, is mind-boggling. And Owen, that spineless wonder, just goes along with it, pathetic. This isn't about community, it's about control, and the fact that they tried to weaponize emotional distress over a locked shed just shows how unhinged these people truly are. They deserved every bit of that legal beatdown, and frankly it's a miracle they didn't get slapped with even more. Good riddance to bad rubbish, I say. Seriously, the audacity of that Karen character is legendary. She's the exact reason why everyone hates HOAs. An eyesore, unchecked construction, please. She just wanted something to complain about, something to dominate, and dragging poor spineless Owen into her schemes, typical. This entire emergency meeting fiasco just screams amateur hour, except with real-world consequences for the victim. It's always the ones who crave power the most who are the least equipped to wield it responsibly. Hope she chokes on her severe anxiety and sleepless nights. She got exactly what she deserved. Well, the legal side of this is wild. Malicious noncompliance, emotional distress caused by the workshop's exclusivity, that's some next-level legalistic gaslighting right there. Their lawyers must have been scraping the bottom of the barrel to come up with those absurd claims. It just shows how confident they were, that they could bully the homeowner into submission. They clearly underestimated Lisa, going from being the target of a fraudulent land grab to turning the tables and having the judge personally nail Owen, Karen, and Graham for damages is just chef's kiss. This is the kind of justice porn I live for. Hope they lose every last penny.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share.